Okay, so it is time for our next panel discussion, and joining Rupert on this panel are Mark Kelly, who's founder of AI Ireland, and Liam Cleere, who's Senior Manager at UCD Research and Innovation. So I'd ask Mark and Liam to come up and take their seats. Thanks. Co-will sheet. Maybe they're still getting their mics. Oh, there's Mark. Come on in, just in time. And Liam, great. Okay, so Rupert, we'll give you a rest. I'll start with Mark and Liam. You can lick the ski, as they say. You can take your rest. Please take a seat. So Liam, maybe I'll start with you. As I say, you are senior manager in UCD Research and Innovation. So how, in your view, is technology coming in a way that can support research managers and administrators, research professionals more generally? And what kind of tools do you use?
Okay, well, brilliant question. Thanks very much, Cleere. And I joined UCD about 20 years ago. And back then we were using paper to administer a lot of our research management with a little access database or something in the background. And, you know, at the time we were probably getting about 50 million a year in research grants. But, you know, the whole environment kind of exploded around that time, and more funding became available, and everything ramped up. So in those 20 years, we probably quadrupled our kind of award value. The number of staff at UCD probably went up about 50%, and the number of researchers. So it's gone to a whole new level. And with that, we needed to look at better systems to manage that. So there was a kind of that whole situation evolved over time. Like initially, there weren't, you know, in the market, there wasn't systems available that could manage people's profiles and grants and proposals. So we ended up building a lot of our own solutions. And like a lot of technologies, you get a certain amount of time out of that. Like you get maybe, well, we got about 12 to 15 years out of that approach.
That's good going, yeah.
But at the end of the day, it was obsolete at that time. It was built on a platform that was no longer supported, and it was patchwork. So we went into the vendor space, and we did the usual procurement exercises, and we worked very well with a UK-based vendor called Symplectic. So we get most of our kind of research management functionality from them at the moment, and around that time too, you know, all our systems moved into the cloud, and we had, you know, additional security kind of, you know, problems with integrating those with our existing financial and HR systems. So what I'd say over the last 20 years is we've seen an evolution from very, very basic kind of technologies to kind of somewhat kind of more mature technologies. But then, you know, when we see technologies like AI coming along, there's another kind of a leap, I think, that's about to happen,
change, isn't
where
it? Yeah.
where we're going to be able to use technologies like that to answer questions that people have in real time, and to be able to review and validate, say, proposals and make them better. Lots of opportunities around analytics and predictive analytics to see where we're going next. So I think there's a whole new world, a brave new world about to happen.
Very good. And I mean, we saw the demo there as well of the coaching session for the early career researcher. That was astounding what you could do just in 2 minutes once you knew the right questions to ask, isn't that right? So Mark, you're someone who's steeped in the world of AI. You've written a book about it. One of the challenges that I hear a lot from kind of the higher education sector and the research sector more generally is how to integrate these kind of tools into workflows, into their operations. So what are your thoughts around that? What are good principles for doing that?
So my first book took 3 years to write, and my 3 books after that took 6 months to write. So I used AI to do the next 3. Genuinely, if you asked which is better, it's probably the next 3, if I'm honest, right? And I was due to release the book in November 2022, and ChatGPT happened.
That's right,
Yeah, which was, I felt like just getting into the fetal position, because 3 years of no Friday Netflix and Saturday to do this book where I was showcasing the interviews I did, and then I could see what ChatGPT had, and then I released it then in March once I calmed down and kind of had an identity crisis, right? So, is there any chess players here? Does anyone know how to play the game of chess?
Yeah.
Yep, this is the interactive part. Yep, yep. So in 1990, Gary Kasparov played IBM's Deep Blue. Remember that vaguely? Yeah. And Gary was the top chess player at the time, kind of like the Michael Jordan of chess. Not as cool, right? But he was very, very, very arrogant man, still is. And they said, Gary, would you play our IBM Deep Blue tool? We think we could beat you in chess. No, I'm not going to play that. Please, he played it. He won 4-0. He told everybody, I'm really, really good at chess, and I could beat now the top AI chess playing robot. The next year, IBM came back and said, hey, would you play this again? No. Please, no. I'll give you $6 million. Yes. So he played that tool, won the first 2 games, lost the next 4. Never went on to play chess again. He's been writing books in Iceland ever since, but he's doing okay. IBM's tool went on to beat the top Jeopardy players. Last year, Google Deep Research focused on a chess-playing robot. But what was different than Gary's chess-playing robot was Gary's chess-playing robot was based on all its data, all the key insights from Gary's games and the top competitors. But IBM, what Google did at 9 o'clock is they taught the AI how to play chess, just itself, just the rules. 12 o'clock, it could beat anybody in the UK. At 12 to 6, at 6 p.m., it could beat anybody in the world. That's prompt engineering. Just teach it the rules, and suddenly it can beat anybody. So what AI does now is it comes to the world with no limitations, no limiting beliefs of this is the way we do things. This is incredibly interesting for AI in healthcare, particularly interesting in drug discovery, where you're reimagining what you do, how you do it. But suddenly you've got a sparring partner where you've got Einstein in your back pocket that you can engage and use. But to get the most out of Einstein, you need to have effective prompt engineering skills. And this is where the magic is with AI. The companies that I've learned who are AI-first companies who do things particularly well with AI, they follow the 5 Ps. The first is people. So they supercharge their people with tools such as Copilot, ChatGPT, but they actually teach them how to use them. What a crazy idea, to actually be taught how to use something properly. The second is process. They digitize their processes, their SOPs, their workflows, so they make them really, really effective. So you're not reinventing the wheel, you're just more efficient. Then you get the product or your service. You're weaving AI into that product or service where it makes sense. So they stay away from wouldn't it be cool snare projects, but stay very, very closely aligned to what makes sense for them and add value to them. And then there's place, a safe place to do it. Now, for a lot of us, we're too busy to learn new things because we're trying to run really, really fast in a hamster wheel. It's 5-to-1 play. So stop reading the blogs and the videos, but immerse yourself in the tech of using it. And that 5-to-1 play will enable you to have new behaviors. The 5th P is proprietary. So the key insights of what you have, you can leverage that. Because AI has made sure that there's no moats anymore, but proprietary data versus synthetic data means that you can take advantage of that. So from a simple framework, if you can get those 5 Ps into everything that you're doing, your team's doing, the institute that you're involved in, that is a framework for success to leverage it. I was speaking to Liam just outside, and we're talking about the hype in AI. My fundamental belief that this is the most underhyped technology. Because when you start to use it correctly, you will see the wins, particularly for a small business. You can now compete with a multinational. But we need literacy. And in Ireland, AI Ireland, we're helping 1 million people become literate in AI because we believe it's the most important skill you will ever get. It's that important. Probably answered a little bit too long.
No, it's really good. It's really good to give people those principles, you know, that framework. In terms of applying that, Liam, I'll come back to you on this one. In terms of applying that in a situation where research managers, research professionals, research administrators are using it, is that practical? Are there barriers in terms of, because a lot of the information that you would deal with might be confidential, or you don't want to getting into the wrong hands, or you know, being leaked out onto the cloud somewhere, etc. So do institutes need policies? Do they need plans, strategies around how to do this effectively?
Absolutely, and I think there are policies in development, especially around looking at the student use of AI in terms of doing their work, basically, and maybe using it as a shortcut. And they're, developing, as there's some more developed in certain areas than others. But having said that, there is a whole risk attached with, because the younger generation, I know because my own daughter is actually in first year in UCD at the moment, but that there isn't that, they don't seem to worry about copyright or protected information. Everything is seen as, once it's accessible on the internet, or if they can find it through their student learning system, it's fair game, that they can use it, they can upload bits of it, they can get insights from AI tools, and they're constantly looking for new tools to get better insights, and looking at, this one is better for solving chemistry and organic chemistry, and this one is better for, whatever, physics. And there is that kind of discovery process that I think that the younger generation is very kind of au fait with,
Which
and,
I
and
suppose
very confident
nowadays
about.
is almost a life skill in the workplace, knowing the best tools to use, the best prompts to use, etc. But from an institutional point of view, are people finding it difficult to use AI tools in the workplace?
Yeah, well, at the moment, I think people are still in the experimentation phase largely. And, that there isn't a kind of an institutional branded, you can use this thing, it's absolutely safe. And, and we don't have our own, a central AI system that we're using for administrative purposes, although that is developing, because at UCD we're implementing Salesforce, and that has a kind of an agent that's AI powered involved in it, as do many of the other tools that we use. But sometimes these tools are hidden in that they're using AI and we don't really know what they're doing behind the scenes. And look, I think it's a rapidly developing area, but there are some really strong use cases, I think, that will help for research and research administration.
Now, Rupert mentioned one of those already, as I say, coming up with the coaching session. Are there any other ones where you can, and grant writing is another one, which is super important. Are there any other areas that you would see as kind of really good candidates for AI being your thought partner? You're still the thought leader. It's your thought partner.
I think in reviewing, because more and more, funding agencies are getting more and more applications for funding, and they're finding it difficult to review them all because their panels are, they're a certain size. And I was talking to a reviewer on the European ERC program just there a couple of days ago. And, they got so many applications this year, they're finding it really difficult to assess them all. And they're belatedly thinking, can we use AI to solve some of this problem? And can we do a kind of a triage process on them? But having said that, that wasn't part of the initial terms and conditions. People didn't consent to that. It hasn't been signed up.
And you need to be transparent about it.
And it has to be transparent. So that's where I think the technology is moving ahead quicker than the policies and the processes. And there needs to be a kind of a look at what's available and what's practical, and then what's ethical.
Yes.
And that's the key.
And the literacy is a big part of that
Absolutely.
as well, and people understanding the responsibilities that they have when they use these very powerful tools. Rupert, thank you for doing the Mentia. You got some really interesting results from the community here. Were there any that particularly stood out to you? Any of the questions or comments that came up?
I'm trying to cast my mind back now. I think so. I do quite a lot of these things and have facilitated sort of workshops with different universities in England, and it's always fairly consistent, I would say. So you usually get, it's kind of that emotive nature of AI. You usually get quite a broad spectrum of responses. I can't think that there were any that stood out, but I think a couple of the points that have been made, or in fact all of them, are spot on, really. I think there's something about the kind of grey areas when you start looking at responsible AI and policies. It becomes quite blurred, really. The lines are blurred. What is confidential information? And I think the generational difference thing is fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm coming to terms with the fact I'm getting older, but I do recognise that in myself. Like, my attitude towards copyright, I kind of feel it's fairly outdated just as a concept. I will just say one thing for if anyone's sort of wondering, that there are ways of having LLMs which are kind of ring-fenced institutionally. So there are versions of Copilot and integration with Teams where actually you can share confidential data with the system and have a degree of confidence that
that it's not leaking out into the wider world.
And I think that's just something to acknowledge because
and that was quite a few of the questions and comments that came through on the Menti were around that, around the safety and the you know, at what point does it become risky to put information in? How confidential? How do you know, etc. That's something that people seem to be worried about.
Yeah, there's one other thing I would say, which is it's really interesting looking at the variability across different institutions in terms of how they think about this stuff, and including my own institution. So I've been to universities where there's almost a two-tier approach, and they think about it one way in respect of research and impact and a completely different way in terms of education and assessment.
Yes, yeah.
One thing we're quite, I think, quite hot on at Plymouth is thinking about how we evolve assessment frameworks so that students can acknowledge how they've used AI rather than that kind of protectionist, or maybe that's a bit provocative, but kind of defensive stance. And I personally think that's absolutely right. I mean, of course, students are going to use AI and staff eventually.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I will open it out to the audience if anybody has questions. A lot of you will have put questions into the Menti, but if there's anything that we haven't covered so far, we have a couple of roving mics, so put the hand up if you have a question and we'll get one to you. Anybody got one for now? Oh, we do here. Yeah, John.
Yeah, just, excuse me, just very quickly, speaking as a EU expert reviewer, we've seen the changes in recent years in the emphasis, obviously, in the scoring, that magic 15. But having done a few reviews recently, or assessments recently, it strikes me that the two things that are now becoming most important because of AI are that original idea, which AI can't come up with, and that is a differentiator, although that can be hard to get through sometimes if the program documentation is overwritten. But the other thing, when you're chasing that final 1 or 1.5 magic scores, the other thing that's going to become much more important is the section on the reality of the collaboration and the reality of the platform. And AI can't do that. So there will be much more emphasis on that, I think. It's a comment rather than a question, really.
Okay, so there's still a lot of room for the humans to be needed in that loop, which, as you say, is so important. Yeah, absolutely. Great. Any other questions or comments? We have one up the front. And if I'm not seeing your hand, just like make it theatrical.
Thanks. I just have a question. I'm just really interested if any of the panel have come across any challenges to intellectual property based on, say, someone puts a grant idea into ChatGPT, would that legally be considered publication and therefore prior art? I haven't heard anything, and it's one of those big questions I have about this.
That's very interesting, because I assume there are differences between paid versions and free versions and all that kind of stuff as well. So anybody on the panel got thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I don't have a specific example, but I'll just give you some more kind of context. Does anybody here use WhatsApp? Has anybody ever read the terms and conditions for WhatsApp? So there's over 150,000 AI products and services being offered now. By the end of this session, we'll probably be another 10. And they're all looking for users, and they're predominantly beta. Roll out the product. So if you go into ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, it says beta, we make mistakes, it's okay though, use us, right? If you're using your free product, you are the product. So it's training on all your data, everything you have. So think of it as someone's come to work each day with a briefcase just to analyze your work, right? Mark's spending 2 more minutes today than he did yesterday. Woohoo! That's their job. So if you're using ChatGPT, the paid version, they're like, we won't train, but it's a little bit sketchy. The Teams version, where you're like 3 people plus $60 a month, you're pretty much watertight, or so they say, that they're not going to train on that. So my advice always is, if you're using these tools, try to get the Teams account as a starting point. But I would not be putting anything anonymous. It's important in life. Now, just coming back to this on the EU AI Act, in February said, AI literacy, that's not That's not an option, it's a requirement for your people to have. Shadow AI is now at probably around record 80% of people are using a ChatGPT that has not been signed off in any type of organization. Customer-centric data, insights is going on to that straight away. You're breaking the law. So you cannot do that. So as an education, you cannot say AI ate my homework. You need to own that and go, here's our policy. It's not perfect. We're going to update it, but this is our expectations. Here's the rules of the road. Same way as I went onto a building site with no hard hat, no yellow viz, and I have an accident, well, I haven't been trained. I shouldn't be there. Your people need to be trained if they're using these tools and systems for best practice. And this is where the mindset needs to come. On the point that you have, I believe the best way to use AI if research is to do a time travel prompt. Go forward 12 months, walk me through all the reasons why this is not going to get 15. And I'll go through all those reasons with you to get you that 15. So it's just how effective you're prompting to be more effective to get the results that you want. And it's a real science to do it, but that's where the leaders really step up to get the most out of these tools.
That's a really good thought experiment to think sort of, what are the implications of me or anybody else putting this text or this data into a platform like this? What could potentially happen? I suppose we should all be doing that all the time. But if there's particularly sensitive information, then I think I would always err on the side of caution, but maybe that's just my generation. Thank you for that question. Very good. We've got a question down the back here, and we have one here. We'll go with, I think someone has a microphone already here. Yeah.
Hi, Hilary from Munster Technological University. So have been using AI around work and stuff like that, and I'm very conscious of there's a lot of different sentiment about it, as in looking at it from an opportunity point of view, to a lot of it where it's like, oh my God, it's such a huge risk and it's so scary and it's going to just, disrupt everything. In my view, disruption is a good thing. But I just think that, it's another tool, right? If you have ethics and if you work with integrity, those principles still apply. And back to the IP example, like we have issues already with researchers sharing their IP without getting it all signed off before IP ever became a thing. So that's just a fundamental problem. So I just like your comments and observations on that. Like if we look at it as another tool with all the same rules that we always should have in place, how different is it actually going to be?
Yeah, Liam?
Yeah, I would just add that in UCD, the UCD library has just published some a practical guide for researchers on how to use AI and the tools that are out there, and also it does look at some of the problems around integrity and making sure that the data is, that you're not. I suppose as a rule of thumb, we have to think that anything we put into AI, it's like putting it up on the internet. Basically, it's like there for everybody. So. And it's to try and get some of those messages across, that it isn't some secure environment that only you control. It's the world's data that you're adding to, and you don't know what some of these companies are going to use those data for. So I think a word of caution always, but I think what I'd say around policy and guidance, it is developing, and I know my colleagues in the library have already published a first version of that, but I also know that the central administration, UCD, that we're looking at putting together policies for the use of AI for teaching, for research, and for administration as well. But again, we're in a catch-up situation.
And is this somewhere that the networks can help? Is this one of those big ticket items that basically people need to get together across networks and working this together? Because surely having a harmonized system across the research networks is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. And if you look at, say, the approach the library took to developing their guidance, they didn't do it in isolation. Mm-hmm. They did it with colleagues across the world, and that's typically how they put those types of things together. That it's not just we're just going to start from scratch on this. So I think, absolutely, it has to be done, and it has to be led by, funding agencies as well, and our terms and all our governance needs to align with the overall protection of data, I think, and protection of people.
Absolutely. I'm just going to come. There's a person with a question, I think, this section.
Hi, Martha from UCC. I came across an application from a funder, a UK funder, and it was kind of the first time I saw that they explicitly asked, for you to declare the use of AI and the prompts that you used. And I just wish funders could be a bit more explicit in how they're assessing that application, because I feel things are there's a bit of ambiguity at the moment. On one hand, it's great to use it. On the other hand, there's a little fear of using it. So just kind of, I suppose, just your observations or comments on that.
Rupert?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. I went to something that's called the Research Funders and Policy Group at Wellcome in London. I think they're focused mainly on medical research. And it was a day-long workshop about the use of AI in the whole funding life cycle. And so I was pleasantly surprised to see both how much emphasis they and weight they put on having that conversation, but also a very kind of open-minded approach. I was kind of expecting it to be quite a defensive stance, like what are we going to do about this? But actually some of the conversations, I was sat next to people saying, wouldn't it just be fairer if all the applications were written by AI and assessed by AI? So I haven't got any answers, but I do agree with you, that transparency piece is critical.
Yeah.
There's just one other thing, just listening to the whole conversation and the questions, I think it's really great that we are bringing it back round to the human element. So the point being made about the authenticity of the collaboration. On the IP side, there's a kind of parallel to that for me, which is about that thing of ideas, a tenner penny, but it's all in the kind of execution. So I think actually a really positive outcome of all of the disruption would be that we focus much more on, what we're doing with it. And I think perceiving AI as this other thing is quite wrong-handed, personally.
Yeah, I think let's say you call your bank, the first thing you hear is these calls are recorded for training purposes, right? And that will just become more transparent. I'm not sure if anybody saw the Willy Wonka Glasgow experiment where they thought they were coming to one picture and then they actually saw it. So if you Google it, you'll see it, 3,000 people, the police had to be called because it was a complete. But if they put a watermark on that image, that would have managed a lot of people's expectations. So having a little line underneath every page and what you've done or citation, that's just talking people through. And once people know, they're usually very cool, relaxed about it because you've talked to it. So it's just a golden thread about how we do things. And that's the policy part, where you agree to policy, you sign up for it, and then you live within those guidelines. And then people become more comfortable. Where you don't have that and becomes a bit the elephant in the room is the strategy where your employees have set your AI policy for you, because that's the culture. Because you haven't taken the leadership to do it yourself. And suddenly Jane's doing 3 days a week, John's working 5 days. Well, Jane's an AI power user, John isn't, right? So that's what we're going to start to see more and more. I see it every day. Who's wrong? But if John doesn't get promoted and Jane does, who's wrong? And it starts to become real issues for reviews. So we're seeing people doing their review each year with their manager. AI's written it, AI's going to feedback on it, and it's just you come together and you chat. And it's the new world that we're coming in. But having open, transparent conversations is very, very important. Yeah. And you have to confront that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much to our panellists. I think that openness, that transparency, that need for literacy, for keeping the humans in it. And I just love that apprehensive but fine. I'm going to get a T-shirt with that made on it. It's brilliant. Thank you so much to Rupert for the keynote and to our panellists, Rupert, Liam and Mark, for that really thought-provoking conversation. A huge round of applause for our panellists, folks. Thank you.